Okay. So you have my slides ready to start. Okay. Right. So we're on the first slide. Yes. Okay. So just hello to everyone. I can see you have a few people there. I'm calling from France, and I'm going to present on a paper which I wrote about small French wine companies and their export strategies to China. Just a bit of background, if you could go to the next slide. Just to tell you a little bit about who I am. I'm actually originally British, but I've lived in France now 10 years, and I did my PhD research on consumer behavior and how consumers buy products on the internet. In particular, I was looking at wine, where hence my interest in wine now that I'm living in the southwest of France, which is a very well-known area for wine. If you could go to the next slide. Okay. I'm just going to give you a brief outline of my presentation today. I'm actually going to talk about the product, the paper in more detail, but I'm going to give you a little bit of background about where I'm situated and the product itself, which is the Jurançon wine. And also then a little bit about how I went about the research and some of the findings. So if we could go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm actually a professor here at the Paul Business School in the southwest of France, and some of our objectives are to publish. And last year I published a book on a chapter with another colleague of mine on the different strategies for the wine production and marketing in France. And when we actually started to write the chapter, we discovered that actually there were some opportunities for French wine companies to export, in particular to China, hence where our paper has come from. So it's kind of a next step from the book chapter. The book chapter was in, if you could go to the next slide, was in the it's in a book on wine and identity, which was published by Routledge in 2013. So basically the research that I'm going to present today comes from this chapter, and it's the next stage on where I'm investigating small French wineries, strategies for export and the opportunities, and trying to understand their motivations and also whether they have the marketing capabilities of exporting their product, their wine, to China, or in this case it's in China. So if you could go to the next slide. So basically the outline of the research is to investigate a little bit more in depth into the opportunities that exist, and whether there are some strategies which they are using which can be useful for other small wine companies. It's a very niche area, so there is a specific way that they need to approach this situation. And finally, it was also to see whether they had any sales and marketing experience for export. They have it for France, but maybe they don't have it for a different market. So we could go to the next slide. The limitations that we came across were, well, first of all, when I did the first part of my research on the book chapter, I discovered that most of the wine companies in the southwest of France in particular are beginning to realize that they don't actually have the marketing capabilities. Even though they believe in their product, they feel that they have a very good, strong position. They don't actually, first of all, they didn't feel the need up until today that they needed to actually sell their product or market their product. But they're beginning to realize that. And secondly, there's the problem with timescales, because if you're expanding this type of product, it takes a long time, because you have to develop it on the land, so you need more land. You need to grow the product, it needs to mature. So it can take from 3 to 7 years to actually develop new. So these are the limitations that we came across. If you could go to the next slide. Okay, the methodology then. We did a very lengthy literature review for the book chapter, and therefore we had the background and the basis for this paper. But so then we decided that the method we would use would be qualitative, because we're looking at small wine producers' attitudes and motivations and their strategies, so just to understand their underlying motivations. And therefore we decided that through the qualitative method, with one-to-one interviews, would give us the best in-depth and rich knowledge about the product and about the situation. So we interviewed one export director of the Cap de Gand. This is a cooperative of wine producers in this area who gather together many different small wine producers, and they are in charge then of marketing the wine. So they're in charge of the publicity, the advertising, they're in charge of the labeling, they're in charge of the bottling, and they're in charge of the distribution. So they have somebody there who is very knowledgeable about the market, and this export director gave us a lot of information, because he's already exporting 10% of his products, of the wine, to other countries around the world, including the US and Mexico. So it's quite a different market. And we spoke to the export director of another grouping of wineries, which are independent, and these are more where they get more involved. The wine companies are more involved in developing the marketing, because it's tourism based. So when they get their customers, when they come to this area, they're mostly tourists, and that's the market. We then talked to 4 independent wine producers as well, who are part of the one above that, and also 2 wine consultants who are knowledgeable about the Chinese market and who are based in France. Okay, next slide please, about the background and history. You'll see a map there, so just to give you a bit of idea of where we're based. We're right down there in the southwest of France. You can see where it says Bordelais, B-O-D-E-L-A-I-S. That's near Bordeaux, which is one of the top regions in France. Most people know Bordeaux wine. We're just below that. You see with the yellow arrow there where it says Jurançon. That's where we're based. So they're not as well known as the Bordeaux, the wine I'm looking at, but it's a very quality niche wine, which is known in the region and also in France. If you go on to the next slide, just to give you an idea of the percentage of production in France, this shows the production in the main wine regions. If you look down there where it says Aquitaine, you can see it says 20% or 20.68% of wine production is in the southwest. So it's the largest wine producing region in France. Go to the next slide, please, with just a little bit of history. To show you that the Jurançon wine is actually a very old wine. It officially gained, if any of you know about wine, the AOC, which is it's like a standard for wine in France, which proves that it's a very good quality. And most people who are wine connoisseurs know that this is a gauge for the image and the brand, and it gives a luxury status to the product. So most wine producers would recognize this, and most wine connoisseurs, people who know about wine, would recognize that. However, so it wasn't just produced in 1936, it's actually been around a lot longer. It's been around since 14th century, and it was actually used for King Henry IV, for his baptism, which is because he's from this region. It's nationally and locally distributed in France, so it is quite well known around the country. But at the moment there is no real export. So if you could just go on to the next slide. It's a very strong tourist region as well, known for its wine. And so the tourists that come to the southwest, here we have mountains and we have sea, because we're not far from the sea, we're about an hour from the sea. But we've got the Pyrenees Mountains as well. And it's very good region, temperature and climate for developing wine. So people come here for the mountains and the sea air. They also come here to visit the wineries. If you go on to the next slide, just a quick overview of the 3 main wines that are here in the southwest region. We've got red wine and we have 2 white wines. The Jurançon that I'm looking at is the one in the middle there, the sweet white wine, which is the most popular. And it's the most unique because I don't want to go into detail about how you produce wine because it gets boring for people who don't know about wine, but it's a very unique way of producing the wine to get such a sweet taste. And there is, because of the grapes and because of the earth that the grapes are grown in, it has a special taste which cannot be replicated or copied anywhere else. So there. If you could go on to the next slide, then I'll just tell you a little bit about the where it's situated in the wine pricing region in France. There are 48 wines in this region, so it's quite a big market. But the main positioning is between €4, which is about $5 in supermarkets. So they have a lower range of wines, but they also have an upper range of wines which goes right up to the $50, which are the top of the range chateaus, the Henry IV brand, which is very expensive. If you could go on to the next slide, it's just to show you a bit about the distribution. And there you can see that the export of these wines, there are only at the moment about 11% of it which is exported. And it's not very well known outside of the country. But there's a strong retail distribution divided between supermarkets, wine specialists, and their own chateau where the wine is sold, where the wine is produced. If you just go on to the next slide. This is a little bit more about the situation with the distribution in France.
Doctor, can you move directly to the conclusion?
Sorry?
Can you move directly to the conclusion because we don't have time?
Yes. Okay, no problem. I'll just go on to, if you could ask your person clicking the slides to go right on to the export situation, which is slide 21.
Okay.
Yeah.